Greetings, wanderers. Today's topic is Eli5. How did people handle their finances in the past, while traveling long distances? Traveling in those days, 19th century at least, was significantly harder. People either carried money or used things like traveler's checks, depending on how old you are depends on if you remember these. To travel abroad, usually you would have to secure passage, and part of that was the organization of how you would fund and get around. It required a lot of planning, and usually people would pre-plan/hire guides, etc. This is one of the ways that tourism became a thing. You booked a guide and they would do all the organizing for you. There were a lot of places to exchange currency around, and you would either carry cash/traveler's check/promissory notes and change them out. I have traveled a lot of Asia and I still use traveler's checks right up to the early 2000s. I was a kid, but I remember checks. I guess, in other half of 20th century banking system was already kind of set up. What about colonial times, for example British people acting all posh in India or something similar? They were building mansions over there, spending months abroad. Vague idea that this is one of the origins for the Knights Templar if you want to go back even further. Pilgrims needed protection on their journey to the Holy Land. They paid for the privilege of having a skilled swordsman travel with them as straightforward blade for hire, but they could also lodge their wealth with the knights in France, who would then write what was recognized in other knight houses as a cast iron guarantee of credit. Effectively the first bank statement of sorts. You could put your money in at one end, and it would be available at the other end, the same amount, just not the same coins, less the usual fees and admin charges, etc. Never realized that's how that worked. It's like they make a deposit in one Knights Templar branch so they can travel without having to carry their money, and then they could make a withdrawal at the different Knights Templar branch located close by their travel destination. In the late 19th century and early 20th century, travelers commonly carried a letter of credit, issued by their own bank, which allowed the beneficiary to withdraw cash from other banks along their journey. Although letters of credit first existed only as paper documents, they were regularly issued by telegraph in the late 19th century, and by telex in the latter half of the 20th century, so yes, they could wire it, as that is really what the phrase means, sending it by telegraph. People have been using letters of credit since the 14th century. It is one of the main reasons banks exist. Oh, okay. So you had like a guarantee you have money back home and you're good for it. That makes sense. I just wonder how good did it work. There must have been loads of frauds all the time. Man, I feel old. So in 1978 I traveled to Greece from UK with my best friend. We took and signed traveler's checks. To cash them you had to go to a proper bank with your passport. Sign the check in front of the cashier, who checked your signature and photo. Banking hours were limited hours on weekdays only. On a side note, letters of introduction. When going to places with little infrastructure set up for travelers, then social networks could be used. For example, you are a young British man going out to India. Your uncle writes a letter to someone who he went to school with, who now is in the Indian Civil Service in Delhi, asking him to put you up in a spare room. Assuming you make a good impression, your uncle's friend might write a letter to another friend who lives in the direction you're traveling, etc. So favors and obligations still happens. Recently my friend's daughter got an intern position 80 miles from home, in the UK. She ended up staying with a university friend of her father's school friend. Banking existed. Take for example the Madras Bank, now the Bank of India. Opened in 1683, they had a branch in London. So you could go to the bank in London to open an account. You got a letter of introduction for the bank in India, so you could access the funds there. You could also get a loan in India on collateral based in the UK or vice versa. You may have to wait the 6 months or so for the message to get from Madras to London and back. But it is possible. Tradable items like bearer bonds have been around since the 1650s. Take that to a colonial bank and swap for local currency. So for the rich there was always a way to move funds. The poor just arrived with what they could carry. The middle class is a recent invention, and a middle class tourist is even a more recent thing. Kinda funny, but I remember hearing on an English history podcast that before invention of large-scale banks in the medieval ages and such, that merchants would literally just carry whole barrels of coins with them. As far as I know, the Knights Templar ran a traveler's bank back in the day to allow pilgrims to reach the Holy Lands without risking carrying bags of gold and silver on the way. On departure, travelers deposited their money with the Templars and received a credit note that could then be used to withdraw smaller amounts along the way, with withdrawals being marked on both the bank's ledgers and the traveler's credit note. Along the pilgrim routes, Templars protected the Christians from theft and violence. The wealth they made from this trade eventually put them in competition with the Catholic Church, which proceeded to shut down the organization, with a particularly significant massacre of Templars occurring on a Friday the 13th. And then they turned into the Freemasons. Traveler's checks. They still exist. I still carry a few well-hidden, security in case of theft. Because thin and of limited value on own, they are a secure way of having emergency money. C. Bernstein, William J. 2008. A Splendid Exchange, How Trade Shaped the World. New York, Atlantic Monthly Press. ISBN 9780871139795. ACOC 176987983. At Goodreads. And to a lesser extent. Bernstein, William J. 2004. The Birth of Plenty, How the Prosperity of the Modern World Was Created. New York, McGraw-Hill. ISBN 9780071421928. ACOC 8115977783. Read with the Wizard and the Prophet. Note that when Bernstein refers to the Napoleonic Wars in the 1750s and 1760s, he really means the 7 Years' War. This is how the Rothschilds got rich. They opened banking houses in the Big Five European cities, and you could have a sort of check, letter of credit, for money on your home account. They already had bank notes. 80 Spanish holidays, you would get some cash from the bank, maybe work out a daily budget for essentials and take that amount. The rest would be traveler's checks, which either meant a holiday trip to a local bank or paying a large commission at an exchange. I used traveler's checks in the 90s.